You're listening to Mr. Liverpool himself, Frank Carlyle, exclusively on Mersey Radio.
Anyway, good evening there, Derek, and I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. Hello, Frank. Hi, guys.
Good evening, Derek. So anyway, the Drifters, what have you got to tell us about them? Now, I think before you start, Ezra would like to say something.
Oh yeah, I was looking at. There's a bit of a brief here that says, the 3 eras of the Drifters. I think this is what Frank's referring to, and I had this impression there were like 39 or 40 different incarnations of the lineup. Is that about right?
Oh, there are almost infinite incarnations. There were 60-odd singers, probably about 10 lead singers. But what also happened was that from the time that the whole band was sacked, a second drifter set itself up. Yeah. One of the guys that was in the original band, Bill Pinkey, when the manager sacked the lot of them, he set up his own original drifters with 3 guys who'd been in the first drifters. And after that, in the 60s, 70s and 80s afterwards, there were a number of simultaneously touring bands calling themselves the Drifters. One of the greatest ones I like was in 2017, you could see Clyde McPhatter's Drifters. Now, he died in 1972, but the lead singer was Ron, his son.
Hi, Derek. It's Mark here. Just a point. The actual name, is that actually owned by one person or a company, or because it seems strange that the Drifters is being old 1953 was it, and you know what I mean? So it's not the Drifters, is it? Because as you said, there's been 60 odd of them. So does someone actually own that name?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the cause of all the problems in the first place. Originally, the name was owned by Clyde McPhatter, who was the guy that was signed up in 1953 by Ahmet Ertegun, the head of Atlantic, to sign them up. And he jointly owned the name with the manager, whose name slips my mind at the moment. And what happened was that when Clyde McPhatter was called up to go into the army, he sold his share in the group back to the manager, and that was when all the trouble started, really. Because what happened was that when Clyde McPhatter went in the army, basically Johnny Moore became the lead singer. Then he was drafted, so now we're up to about 1958, and a guy called Bobby Hendricks was the lead singer for a little bit. But George Treadwell, that's the manager's name that was on the tip of the tongue, on the 30th of May 1958, he sacked the whole band in one night. And that's how Benny King came into the fray. They were playing a week's residency in Harlem. And on the bill was a band called the Crowns with Earl Nelson, which is what his name was before he changed it to Benny King.
Oh, and at the end isn't that unbelievable?
You should have called him Bill when you met him then, shouldn't you, Frank?
Yeah, I should have done. That's incredible. I didn't even know that. I thought, you just expect him to be like Benjamin, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. And Ben.
Yeah.
Ben
Go on then, what were you saying?
I'm sorry, Derek.
It's good,
I'm just fascinated, though.
He took his name, actually, from his favourite uncle. You could have you asked him about him next. Oh, there won't be a next time, of course.
No,
but Benny King was the name of his favourite uncle. And what happened
was it Ben E? Sorry, Derek. Was it Ben E or Benny, his uncle?
No, it is Ben, capital E, King.
Right.
I'm not sure the E actually stands for anything.
Yeah,
I've never seen it stand for anything.
Yeah, like Dwight S, whatever it was. What was his name? R.E.S. Truman. S stood for nothing today.
Exactly.
Yeah. Google email.
Google email. Google email. So go on, Derek. This is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, because the Benny King era is really interesting. What happened then? They sacked the existing Drifters.
Listen, before you go on, was Benny King, like a sort of like how can I say, an individual singer or unheard of, or what? How did he get drifted in? Excuse the pun. Drifted into the Drifters.
What it was, he was the lead singer with a group called the Five Crowns. They shortened their name to the Crowns, and the Crowns were playing at this week-long residency. I think Ray Charles was there as well. But the Crowns were playing at this residency, and at the end of the week, the manager, George Treadwell, because the Drifters hadn't really had a hit for a year, the Bobby Hendricks guy had already left the band, so they were really without a proper lead singer. So he just sacked a lot of them and instated the Crowns as his band. And because that's why the question at the beginning was great, because that's the reason he could do it. George Treadwell owned the Drifters' name, so when he sacked the first band, he just renamed the Crowns to the Drifters. But it sort of gets better than that, because what happened then, that's the middle of 58, they had a whole load of gigs to fulfill. And for the best part of a year, they were on the road. They didn't go into the studio until May 59.
Derek?
And what happened was then, they went in, that's when they recorded There Goes My Baby.
Derek, I'm just looking at, I kind of did a bit of research myself before I came on the show, and I'm just looking at this, and it looks like, Benny King is the man that everyone thinks it was the voice of the Drifters, don't they?
No, yeah, absolutely, he's not.
Because I was going to say he was only there for 2 years.
He was only actually, the first year they didn't record. He actually only recorded a handful of songs with them, and when that second song you played came out, which was the Benny King song, Save the Last Dance for Me, he'd already left the band.
Go on.
You can see, if you look at the label on the American release of the single, it credits it as vocal quartet and Benny King.
Wow.
It's weird. When the group started with Clyde McPhatter, the credits then were Clyde McPhatter and the Drifters. So in a lot of ways, the Drifters were a backing group to the main singer. But the Benny King one's great, because what happened when they went into the recording studio, the Crowns had been managed by a guy called Lover Patterson, which I think is a great name. And he was the manager of the Crowns. But the Crowns didn't have a contract for the bunch of them. They all had individual contracts. And when Lover Patterson sold the band, basically, the contracts of the Crowns to Treadwell, he didn't sell him Benny King's contract. And what happened then is Lover Patterson and George Treadwell fell out. So after the first round of touring up until mid 59, Benny King didn't go out on the tours after that. He was only in the recording band, and Charlie Williams used to do most of the lead singing when they were on the tours. But you're right. I mean, sorry.
Go on, Derek.
I was just going to say, if you wanted to look for a voice of the Drifters, you'd have to go for Johnny Moore.
Yeah, he was there for about 6 or 7 years, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, do you know you're more than a number in my little red book. That's must be the longest title in the world. Who's that sung by? Was that Johnny Moore?
That was Johnny Moore, yeah. Well, what happened was that the three eras, they were very much an R&B group with Clyde McPhatter in the 50s, and then with Benny King, Charlie Moore, Charlie Thomas, Rudy Lewis, Johnny Moore, they became a soul band. They were part of the Atlantic Soul roster. In fact, the guy that formed Atlantic record label in 1947, Ahmet Ertegun, he's quoted as calling them the all-time greatest Atlantic group. But by the end of the 60s, the hits had run out on both sides of the Atlantic by about 67 or 68. And what happened is, like with a number of American acts, like Eddie Cochran, they had a lot more success in the UK.
Yeah.
So who was it then who sang Sitting in the Back Row? Was that Johnny Moore as well?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because that was late 60s, was it?
Yeah,
Mid to late 60s. Yeah. So actually, when I'm thinking of the Drifters, I shouldn't be thinking Benny King. I should be thinking of Johnny Moore, shouldn't I? Really?
Yeah.
Well,
but it's the same as everything else. You know, we associate Benny King with the Drifters, and he's the number one. If you asked the ordinary bloke or girl around the country, for example, you know, like music, and you said, name one singer out the Drifters, they'll all say Benny King. They will not say Johnny Moore.
They won't even know who Johnny Moore is.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
And yes, he had.
And Rudy Lewis is another one.
Yeah.
Rudy Lewis recorded an awful lot of the big hits.
Yeah. It's strange that though, isn't it? You know, because you must have a mind of information, you know, about these particular people. I'm not just saying the likes of Johnny Moore or Rudy Lewis. There must be other people as well that have been in bands, you know, groups that is, and we wouldn't have a clue. Say like the Supremes, for example. The Supremes, you just Diana Ross.
That's right.
And that's it, you know. All right, Mary Moore was in the was it Mary Moore?
Wilson?
Mary Wilson, you know, she was in the band, but who else would know that, you know? Who'd know Mary Wilson? And it's just
but
Diana
she played down Matthew Street not long ago, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
She was in the back room at the Cavern, I think, just a few months ago.
Yeah.
Oh, a surprising number of people from this era are still on the road.
Yeah.
And a lot of the original bands, I mean, the Searchers are still on the road. A couple of the original-ish guys.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
well, it's McNally, isn't it? And Mike Pender. Well, Mike Pender's been on the show, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And, you know, they have the Mike Pender searches and the McNally searches and
that's right.
Well, Manfred Mann is another one, isn't it? You've got Earth Band and Manfred Mann, and you know, the band that called themselves Manfred Mann when they split didn't include Manfred Mann.
Yeah, because Manfred Mann was the organist, wasn't he? And Paul Jones was the singer.
But they replaced Paul Jones with the other fella. What's his name, Derek? The other singer.
Oh, he's the guy that
Darbo, Mike Darbo. Yeah.
Mike Darbo. In fact, they're back together now, calling themselves the Manfreds.
Yeah, that's it, the Manfreds. Yeah.
But Mike Darbo or Paul?
Is that? I think that's Mike Darbo, isn't it? The
Mike
Manfreds.
Darbo,
it's both of them actually.
Really?
Yeah, Paul Jones is back with them as well. He sort of comes to goes.
Yeah.
But I know recently they were both on a tour. I saw an advert for them, and both lead singers were.
Well, that'd be good because Mike is one of the best harmonica players there is. In terms of blues harmonica, he's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So it's a mess, isn't it? Really, all this.
Well, it's not. I was Mark was talking before. When he does talk like that.
Sorry, but he get him and
he was talking about Queen. He said, and once Freddie Mercury died, that was it. It was the end of Queen. Because you can't replace it. I was only talking about the Drifters, weren't we, Mark?
Yeah. I think a lot to do with is regard the force of personality of the lead singer. Yeah. Freddie Mercury was such a big person, you just couldn't replace him.
No.
Where you go for Drifters, for instance.
you can
you can say because they're such a harmonious group.
Yeah.
They've still got that sound, so you can still change one or two members. But I didn't think there was 60.
Well, it's like the Beatles, isn't it? It's like the Beatles. You know, you take one of the Beatles out. It sounds
like you're saying if you took all four out, could you still call them the Beatles? Would people still call them the Beatles?
No. Well, that's why McCartney.
No, they would if they replaced one at a time. You know, it's like it's three with a different one, then two with a different two, then three with it, and it just becomes four different guys 20 years later who call themselves the Beatles still.
Yeah, but the thing is, you know, if you like, when the Beatles broke up, why didn't one of them stay and just say, well, shall we stay and we'll just replace Lennon?
Well, I think a few of them done a little bit of a duets together, and I think they probably toyed with the idea.
There was I think
back together a little bit, but I don't think someone had to do that final
I could be wrong, Mark, but I suspect that there was some commercial involvement in that decision not to reform at that time or to play under some other name. I think, the fights they were having with Apple Corps were enormous, weren't they?
Yeah.
And so they probably were so preoccupied with that the notion of carrying on with some of them as Beatles just wouldn't have.
What's your take on that, Derek?
I tend to agree with the thought that there was so much animosity in the 70s. I mean, Lennon and McCartney did jam together in 74, and that's on a bootleg called A Snoot and a Snort, A Toot and a Snort in 74, and that was the last time they played together. I think John Lennon was in New York recording Pussycats with Nielsen, and Paul McCartney just happened to be there, and they got together and they played together for the last time. I think Stevie Wonder's on that, in that jam as well, and on that bootleg. But I mean, there was a lot of animosity. I mean, they didn't actually. I think the formal winding up of the band was about 74, and of course John Lennon dropped out. I mean, when he was murdered, he'd only released his last album 2 or 3 weeks earlier, and I think it was about his first album for 4 years.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot going on, really.
Well, listen, Derek, about your book and your website, can you give us more information on it, please, before we finish?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the information here is taken out of the book called Rock and Roll Unravelled. Tells the story of rock and roll from its roots to mid-70s punk. And very active, and you get a lot of information from that and a lot of stuff about rock and roll on the website on www.rockandroll.com, and very active on Twitter and Facebook as well. Twitter on RNR Unravelled, and Facebook at Rock and Roll Unravelled.
Wow. And you get all this on your, all everything, all the information and everything else about how to acquire it on your website, yeah?
Absolutely. Well, it's actually stocked in Right Blend in Waterloo.
Okay. It's funny, Mark David Kinnish, he said about, he said the point during the White Album, obviously the Beatles, he said a lot of the time there was only sometimes 2 of them in the studio.
Oh, absolutely.
It's weird.
By the time he got to, I mean that was when the rock really set in.
Yeah.
There are different accounts of Yoko's influence in all that, but a lot of accounts reckon. I mean, Yoko spent an awful lot of time in the recording studio offering advice, which wasn't always gratefully accepted, I don't think.
Yeah,
but by the time you get
a bit like Spinal Tap, isn't it, Derek? With the band bringing the girlfriends in, taking over the show.
Yeah, but the thing is, I know some people like that. They try to tell you, and they haven't a clue. They've never been. Say, like the radio, for example. Some particular person said to me, "This is the way you should into it." And I went, "What are you telling me? Well, you telling me? Never been inside a studio in their lives. Never been on the radio. This is how you should interview." Haven't a clue. They just like to, put the pennant in. And it's like Yoko, unfortunately, trying to put the pennant in.
But she could sing, couldn't she? We all knew.
She's absolutely
what a brilliant voice,
Wonderful, absolutely. Listen, Derek, what would you like to talk about next month? It's entirely up to you.
Okay. I'll give it some thought and drop you a couple of ideas.
Yeah, get hold of Jason.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because you've got so much energy there and so much to talk about. It's fun. You mentioned Eddie Cochran there before.
Yeah.
You surprised me there about he never had a number 1 hit in the States. Yeah, he was a bigger hit.
He was a lot bigger here, particularly after he died.
Yeah.
It's surprising when you look at a lot of these artists. A lot weren't that successful in America, and a lot have become more successful in retrospect. I mean, Eddie Cochran is right up there now with the classic rock and rollers, but at the time he wasn't that big. Well, I wouldn't go so far as he wasn't that big, but his stature has grown, I think, historically, quite justifiably as well. He wrote a lot of his own stuff as well, you know.
Did he, yeah? Did he write the three steps?
3 Steps to Heaven.
Well,
I can't remember if he wrote that particular one. His girlfriend, Sharon Shealy, wrote quite a lot. And
Summertime Blues.
Yeah.
That's right. And you've got to be a bit careful because his brother writes as well. So there are credits that say Cochran Shealy, and it's actually his brother, not him.
I know that Frank's trying to just end this little bit of the session at the moment, but I just had to ask you this because I just scribbled a note here for myself. You know, you're saying what to do next time. Would you consider something? A thing that interests me a lot is the subject of fame after they died. You kind of just alluded to it a minute ago. You know, Eddie Cochran was more popular after he died with some of those songs in the UK, particularly. There must be oodles of really famous people who really only made it after they died. And, there's like painters, obviously, but that we know of, but like Van Gogh, but the singers and the musicians who were famous after they died, like Eddie Cochran was more famous after he'd gone.
Even
and so
Elvis.
On. To some degree.
Absolutely.
But it would be good to, if you, I'd like it if you were able to consider that for one of the shows that we could listen to.
Great.
Just go through a list of that. That'd be great.
I've just got visions now of all these agents pushing death onto their arses. This is going to be a good career move for you, trust me.
Yeah. When you say, when you're on stage last night, you really died there.
Listen, I wonder if Elvis is really still alive. Yeah. You know what Mark said? This will be a good move for you.
He does work at the Chippy.
He does. Exactly. He's down there in Bolton. Anyway. Oh, it's been absolutely wonderful again, Derek. Absolutely fascinating. So, there's a suggestion by Mr. Cambridge man there, Ed, to do, after they died.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, because, even recently, when someone has died, and we've had a lot of deaths, unfortunately, in the last 12 months or so, they've just shot back up to number one, haven't they? And
I'll tell you just very quickly what you're getting people dying who no one ever heard of because they weren't the front man.
Exactly.
So members of bands who were in the back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Derek, we have to leave it. I'm sorry, we've got to go over to Hollywood, of all places.
Right.
Okay, I'll see you next month.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you.
See you, Derek.
The best in 60s and 70s music, plus a little bit of history. Tune into Frank Carlyle every Monday at 8 p.m. here only on Mersey Radio.